Robert didn't sleep that night. He sat in his home office, staring at the wall of awards and photos that documented his rise to success. But now every image felt like a lie. There was the photo from Tommy's first birthday, where Robert was holding a child who wasn't his son. Another picture from last Christmas, where he and Tommy wore matching sweaters that Maria had bought and wrapped. The sun was barely coming up when Robert heard movement in the kitchen. Maria always arrived at 5:30 to prepare breakfast and pack Tommy's lunch for daycare. Today, Robert was waiting for her. He found her standing at the counter, slicing fruit with hands that trembled slightly. She had probably spent the night wondering if she would still have a job in the morning. When she heard his footsteps, Maria turned around with the same fearful expression from the night before. "We need to talk," Robert said gently. He didn't want to frighten her more than she already was. Maria nodded and set down the knife. She clasped her hands together to stop them from shaking. "Mr. Williams, please let me explain everything. I know you must hate me for keeping this secret." "I don't hate you, Maria," Robert said, surprising both of them. "But I need to understand what happened. I need to know the whole truth." They sat across from each other at the kitchen table where Robert rarely ate. Usually, he grabbed coffee and rushed to his first meeting. This morning, time felt frozen. Maria took a deep breath and began to speak. Her voice was quiet but steady, like someone who had rehearsed this conversation in her mind 1,000 times. "It started 4 years ago, when Mrs. Victoria was pregnant," Maria began. She was different then, nervous all the time. She would stare at herself in the mirror for hours, touching her belly and crying. "I thought it was normal pregnancy emotions." Robert remembered those months. He had been launching his expansion into Asian markets and was traveling constantly. Victoria had seemed moody, but he had attributed it to hormones and his frequent absences. One night, about a month before Tommy was born, Mrs. Victoria came home very late. She had been drinking, which was strange because she had been so careful during the pregnancy. "She found me cleaning the nursery and just started crying." Maria paused, lost in the painful memory. "She told me she had made a terrible mistake. She said the baby wasn't yours, Mr. Williams. She had been having an affair with her personal trainer, Carlos, for months before she got pregnant." The name hit Robert like a punch to the stomach. He remembered Carlos, young, handsome, always hanging around the house for Victoria's daily workout sessions. Robert had even paid the man's salary thinking he was helping his wife stay healthy during a difficult time in their marriage. "Victoria was terrified," Maria continued. "She said Carlos had disappeared when she told him about the pregnancy. He changed his phone number and left town. She was alone with this secret, and she didn't know what to do." Robert tried to imagine Victoria in those final weeks of pregnancy, carrying a child that wasn't his while he planned business trips and worried about quarterly earnings. The guilt was overwhelming. "She begged me to help her," Maria said, tears starting to flow. "She said if you found out, you would divorce her and take everything away. She was scared you would hate the baby for not being yours. She asked me to help take care of Tommy after he was born, to make sure he was loved no matter what." "But why didn't you tell me?" Robert asked, though he wasn't angry. He genuinely wanted to understand. Maria's face crumpled. "Because 3 months after Tommy was born, I made a mistake. I was changing his diaper, and he looked up at me with those big brown eyes, and I whispered, 'Mijo,' my son." Mrs. Victoria heard me. The Spanish word for "my son" hung in the air between them. Robert realized Maria had been calling Tommy her child from the very beginning, not just as a caregiver, but as his mother. "She was furious," Maria continued. "She accused me of trying to steal her family. But then she looked at Tommy, really looked at him, and she saw what I saw. He looked exactly like me. She realized that people would start asking questions as he got older." Maria wiped her eyes with a dish towel. "That's when she made me promise never to tell anyone. She said if I ever claimed Tommy was mine, she would call immigration and have me deported. She knew I had been working on getting my legal status fixed, and she threatened to ruin everything." Robert felt sick. Victoria had used Maria's vulnerable immigration status as a weapon to keep her quiet. She had turned a mother's love for her child into a prison sentence. "But the worst part," Maria said, her voice breaking, "was when she told me that if I ever tried to take Tommy away, she would make sure I never saw my daughter Rosa again." Rosa lives with my mother in Mexico because I came here to work and send money home. Mrs. Victoria said she had connections that could make it impossible for me to ever return to Mexico or bring Rosa here. The full cruelty of the situation became clear to Robert. Victoria had threatened both of Maria's children, the son she couldn't claim and the daughter she couldn't see. She had trapped Maria in a web of fear and legal vulnerability, so I stayed quiet, Maria said. I watched Mrs. Victoria hold my son for pictures and call herself his mother. I taught him to call her Mama while I was just Maria, the housekeeper. When he got sick, I was the one who stayed up all night with him, but she took him to the doctor and got the credit for being a caring mother. Robert remembered those nights, when he would call home from business trips and Victoria would tell him Tommy had been fussy but was feeling better. He never knew that Maria had been the one actually caring for his sick child. When you and Mrs. Victoria got divorced, I thought maybe things would change, Maria said, but she made me promise one more time to keep the secret. She said now that she was leaving, it was even more important that no one knew the truth. She said you were a good man who loved Tommy, and the boy needed a father, even if you weren't his biological father. The irony was devastating. Victoria had abandoned both Robert and Tommy, but she had still controlled their lives through the secret she had forced Maria to keep. All these years, I've watched you try so hard to connect with Tommy, Maria said softly. You read him bedtime stories over video calls from hotels around the world. You bring him presents from every business trip. You love him so much, and it breaks my heart that you don't know he's not really yours. But he is mine, Robert said, surprising Maria with the firmness in his voice. Maybe not by blood, but I've been his father for 3 years. I've worried about him, planned for his future, dreamed about the man he'll become. That doesn't just disappear. Maria looked at him with amazement. She had expected anger, blame, maybe even threats of her own. Instead, she saw a man trying to process an impossible situation with grace. The question now, Robert said quietly, is what we do about the truth. Tommy deserves better than the lies we've all been living. For the first time in years, Maria felt a spark of hope. Maybe there was a way forward that didn't require choosing between her 2 children or living in constant fear. Maybe the truth, as painful as it was, could finally set them all free. The next few days passed like a nightmare that Robert couldn't wake up from. He went through the motions of his daily routine, but everything felt different. During board meetings, he found himself staring out the window instead of focusing on profit margins. When his assistant handed him contracts to sign, he saw Tommy's face instead of legal documents. The hardest part was coming home each evening. Tommy would run to greet him at the door, arms stretched wide, shouting, "Daddy's home!" with pure joy. Robert would pick up the little boy and hug him tight, but now he couldn't stop analyzing every feature. The shape of Tommy's nose, the color of his skin, the way he laughed. It all screamed Maria, not William's family genetics. Robert had always wondered why Tommy looked so different from the baby photos of himself. His mother had often commented that Tommy didn't seem to have any Williams family traits. At the time, Robert had assumed the boy simply favored Victoria's side. Now he knew the truth was far more complicated. On Thursday evening, Robert made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of hiding in his office after dinner, he went to Tommy's room for bedtime story time. This had been their special routine whenever Robert was home, though it happened far less often than either of them would have liked. Tommy was already in his pajamas, sitting cross-legged on his bed with 3 picture books spread in front of him. His face lit up when Robert appeared in the doorway. "Daddy! Will you read all 3 tonight?" Tommy asked hopefully. Robert sat down beside his son and picked up the first book. As he read about brave knights and friendly dragons, he watched Tommy's reactions. The boy giggled at the funny voices Robert made for different characters. He pointed at pictures and asked questions that showed how smart and curious he was. When a sad part came in the story, Tommy leaned against Robert's shoulder for comfort. This was his son in every way that mattered, Robert realized. Biology was just science. Love was what made a family. But doubt crept in anyway. Robert found himself studying Tommy during breakfast the next morning. The boy was chattering about his upcoming field trip to the zoo, mixing English and Spanish words the way he always did when he got excited. Every Spanish phrase came naturally to Tommy because Maria had been teaching him since he could talk. "Daddy, can Maria come to the zoo too?" Tommy asked suddenly. "Why do you want Maria to come?" Robert asked, trying to keep his voice casual. Tommy shrugged the way 3-year-olds do when the answer seems obvious. "Because she knows all the animal names in Spanish, and she makes the best sandwiches for trips. And she gets scared of the snakes, which is funny." Robert felt his heart sink. Tommy's connection to Maria wasn't just about language or food. It was about shared experiences, inside jokes, and genuine affection. She had been there for countless small moments that Robert had missed while building his business empire. That afternoon, Robert did something he had never done before. He canceled all his meetings and picked Tommy up from daycare early. They went to the park where Tommy loved to play on the swings. As Robert pushed the swing, Tommy chattered about his day. He talked about his friend Alex, who had brought a lizard for show and tell, about the art project they were making for Mother's Day, and about how his teacher, Miss Jenny, had said his Spanish was getting really good. "Who taught you Spanish, buddy?" Robert asked, even though he already knew the answer. "Maria," Tommy said proudly. "She says it's important to know 2 languages. She's teaching me words for my abuela in Mexico that I haven't met yet." Robert's hands froze on the swing. Tommy's grandmother in Mexico. Maria's mother. Tommy was talking about his real grandmother without knowing it. "Tell me about Maria," Robert said gently. Tommy's whole face brightened. "She's the best. She makes pancakes that look like animals. When I have bad dreams, she sits with me until I fall asleep again. She sings songs that make me feel better, and she gives the best hugs in the whole world." Each word was like a knife in Robert's chest. Tommy was describing the relationship every child should have with their mother. Maria had been giving Tommy all the love and attention that Victoria had never provided, all while pretending to be just the help. "Do you love Maria?" Robert asked. "Of course," Tommy said, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Don't you love Maria too, Daddy? She takes care of our whole family, our family." Tommy had unknowingly described the truth. Maria wasn't just an employee. She was the heart of their household. She was the one who remembered Tommy's favorite bedtime snacks, who knew exactly how to comfort him when he was upset, who celebrated his small victories and worried about his well-being. That evening, Robert made another difficult decision. He hired a private investigator named Detective James Morrison, a man known for handling sensitive family matters with discretion. Robert needed concrete proof of what Maria had told him, not just for his own peace of mind, but because he was starting to form a plan that would require legal documentation. Detective Morrison was thorough and professional. Within a week, he had traced Carlos Mendez, Victoria's former personal trainer. Carlos was now living in Phoenix, working at a gym and apparently unaware that he had a son. The investigator had also obtained medical records that confirmed the timeline of Victoria's affair, but the most damaging evidence came from Victoria's own digital trail. Detective Morrison had found text messages between Victoria and her sister sent during her pregnancy, where she admitted the baby wasn't Robert's child. There were also financial records showing payments to Carlos that stopped abruptly when Victoria learned she was pregnant. The DNA test results arrived on a Tuesday. Robert stared at the papers that officially confirmed what his heart already knew. Tommy was not his biological son. The numbers and percentages on the lab report reduced 3 years of fatherhood to cold scientific facts. But something strange happened as Robert read those results. Instead of feeling devastated, he felt relief. The uncertainty was over. Now he could focus on what really mattered: Tommy's well-being and happiness. Robert thought about all the successful businessmen he knew who had strained relationships with their biological children. Money and genetics didn't guarantee love or connection. Meanwhile, he had watched Maria pour genuine care into Tommy every single day, never asking for recognition or credit. That night, Robert stood outside Tommy's bedroom door and listened to Maria reading a bedtime story in Spanish. Her voice was warm and patient as she explained words Tommy didn't understand. When the story ended, Robert heard Tommy say something that changed everything. "Te amo, Mama Maria," Tommy whispered in his sleepy voice. "Yo también te amo." "Mijo," Maria whispered back, probably thinking no one could hear. "I love you too, my son." Robert realized that Tommy already knew the truth in his heart, even if his young mind couldn't understand the complicated adult situation. He called Maria his mama when no one was watching. She called him her son when she thought it was safe. They were already a family. They just needed someone brave enough to make it official. Robert pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found his lawyer's number. Tomorrow, he would start the process of making everything right. Tommy deserved to know his real mother, and Maria deserved to claim her son without fear. The Williams family was about to be redefined, and Robert was ready to shock everyone with what he planned to do next. Robert's lawyer, David Chen, had handled some unusual cases in his 30-year career, but nothing quite like this. When Robert walked into the law office that Friday morning and explained his situation, David had to ask him to repeat the story twice. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," David said, adjusting his glasses and reviewing his notes. "You want to legally share custody of Tommy with Maria, the woman who is actually his biological mother, while maintaining your own parental rights as his adoptive father?" "That's exactly right," Robert confirmed. "I want us to be equal co-parents in the eyes of the law," David frowned. "Robert, this is incredibly complex. You could simply grant Maria visitation rights or help her establish separate custody. Why do you want to create this shared arrangement?" Robert had spent sleepless nights asking himself the same question. The answer wasn't logical or businesslike, which made it hard to explain to others. But he knew it was right. "Because Tommy needs both of us," Robert said firmly. "I've been his father for 3 years, and Maria has been his mother from day one. We're not taking away from each other. We're both adding to his life. I want to make our family official instead of pretending it doesn't already exist." David warned Robert about the challenges ahead. Victoria might fight the arrangement if she learned about it. Robert's business associates might question his judgment. The media could turn the story into a scandal that would affect his company's stock prices. But Robert had already made up his mind. He authorized David to begin the legal paperwork and asked him to research immigration lawyers who could help expedite Maria's path to citizenship. The hardest part was figuring out how to tell Maria about his decision. Robert knew she would be suspicious of any offer that seemed too good to be true. After years of living in fear of deportation and separation from her children, Maria had learned not to trust promises from wealthy employers. Robert chose Sunday afternoon to have the conversation. Tommy was napping, and Maria was in the garden tending to the vegetable patch she had planted behind the house. She grew tomatoes, peppers, and herbs that she used in the meals she prepared for the family. "Maria, can we talk?" Robert asked, approaching carefully so he wouldn't startle her. She stood up, brushing dirt from her gardening gloves. "Of course, Mr. Williams. Is something wrong?" "Actually, I hope something is about to be very right," Robert said. "I have a proposal for you, but I need you to listen to the whole thing before you say anything." Maria's face showed the familiar wariness that appeared whenever their conversations turned serious. She had learned to expect bad news from powerful men. "I want you to become Tommy's legal co-parent with me," Robert said directly. "Equal custody, equal decision-making rights, equal responsibility for raising him. I want us to adopt him together as a team." Maria stared at him for a long moment, then sat down hard on the garden bench. "Mr. Williams, I don't understand. Are you saying you want to fire me and give me custody of Tommy instead?" "No," Robert said, sitting beside her. "I'm saying I want us to raise him together. You would still live here, but not as my employee. You would be here as Tommy's mother, with all the rights and recognition that title deserves." Maria's hands started shaking. "But why would you do this? You could have any custody arrangement you want. You could send me away and keep Tommy for yourself." Robert had anticipated this question and had practiced his answer. "Because I've watched you love my son for 3 years, and I've watched him love you back. Because you've never asked for anything except the chance to care for him. Because Tommy deserves to have his real mother in his life openly, not hiding in the shadows." "Your son?" Maria asked softly. "Yes, my son," Robert said firmly. "Biology doesn't change the fact that I've been his father since he was born. I've changed his diapers, worried about his fevers, planned for his education, and dreamed about his future. That makes him my son just as much as giving birth to him makes him yours." Tears started flowing down Maria's cheeks. Mr. Williams, you don't know what it's been like. Watching other people think I'm just the help when I'm actually his mother. Having to step back when he gets hurt so that strangers think you're the only parent who cares about him. Teaching him to call me Maria when every instinct in my body wants him to call me Mama. Then we stop pretending, Robert said. We make you his legal mother and me his legal father. We share custody, we share decisions, and we share the joy of raising him together. Maria wiped her eyes with the back of her gardening gloves. What about my daughter Rosa in Mexico? What about my legal status here? I've already spoken with immigration lawyers, Robert explained. We can expedite your citizenship process. Once that's complete, we can work on bringing Rosa here to live with us. This house has plenty of room for 2 children. The offer was so overwhelming that Maria couldn't process it all at once. You would do that? You would let my daughter come here and live in your house? Maria, if we're going to be co-parents to Tommy, then Rosa would be part of our extended family too. She's Tommy's half-sister, even if they don't know it yet. She belongs here just as much as he does. Maria stood up and walked to the edge of the garden, looking out over the perfectly manicured lawn that stretched toward the pool area. Robert had offered her everything she had dreamed about but never dared to hope for. What would people say? She asked finally. Your business friends, your social circle? They'll think you've lost your mind. Robert laughed, surprising both of them. Maria, I built a multi-billion-dollar empire by making decisions that other people thought were crazy. I've never worried about what people think when I know I'm doing the right thing. But this is different, Maria protested. This is your personal life, your reputation, your son's future. Exactly, Robert agreed. This is the most important decision I've ever made, which is why I'm not going to let other people's opinions influence it. Maria turned back to face him. What about Mrs. Victoria? She still has legal rights as Tommy's mother on paper. What if she comes back and tries to take him away from both of us? Robert's expression hardened. Victoria abandoned her rights when she walked away from Tommy's life. My lawyers are confident that her history of neglect and abandonment will work against her if she ever tries to challenge our arrangement. And if she threatens to expose the truth about Tommy's paternity, Maria asked, then she'll also have to explain why she committed paternity fraud and forced his biological mother to live as a servant in her own child's life, Robert replied. Victoria has more to lose than we do if this story becomes public. Maria sat back down, overwhelmed by the possibilities Robert was offering. I need time to think about this, she said quietly. Of course, Robert agreed. Take all the time you need. But Maria, I want you to know that this isn't charity or pity. This is me recognizing what's already true. We're already Tommy's parents. We're already a family. I just want to make it official. That evening, Maria didn't sleep. She sat in her small apartment above the garage, looking at photos of Rosa that she kept on her nightstand. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future where both her children lived under the same roof, where she could openly love Tommy without fear, and where Rosa could grow up with opportunities Maria had only dreamed about. By morning, Maria had made her decision. She was ready to become the mother she had always been in her heart. The news broke 3 weeks after the legal papers were filed. Robert had hoped to keep the custody arrangement private, but a court clerk with connections to the local gossip blogs had leaked the story. The headline read, Tech billionaire shares custody with former housekeeper. What's really going on? Within hours, Robert's phone was buzzing with calls from reporters, business associates, and old friends who couldn't believe what they were reading. The story painted Maria as a gold digger who had somehow manipulated Robert into giving her rights to his child and money. Robert's assistant fielded dozens of interview requests, but Robert refused them all. He had more important things to worry about than managing his public image. Maria was terrified by the sudden attention, and Tommy was confused by the photographers who had started camping outside the house. The worst reaction came from Robert's own social circle. At the country club where Robert had been a member for 15 years, conversation stopped when he walked into rooms. Former friends whispered behind his back about his poor judgment and obvious breakdown. Margaret Thornfield, the wife of Robert's biggest business rival, cornered him at a charity gala that he couldn't avoid attending. Robert, darling, everyone is so concerned about you. she said with fake sympathy dripping from her voice. We understand that divorce can make men do irrational things, but sharing custody with the help? Really? Robert kept his voice calm but firm. Maria isn't the help, Margaret. She's Tommy's co-parent and one of the most devoted mothers I've ever known. If people can't understand that, it says more about them than it does about our family. Margaret's eyebrows shot up. Your family? Robert, this woman was your employee. Now she's living in your house as an equal? What example does this set for Tommy? It sets the example that love and commitment matter more than social expectations, Robert replied. Tommy is lucky to have two parents who put his needs first. The conversation ended when Margaret huffed away to spread more gossip, but Robert knew this was just the beginning. He would face these judgments everywhere he went. The business world was equally harsh. During a board meeting for his largest company, several investors expressed concerns about Robert's personal instability affecting stock prices. One board member suggested that Robert take a leave of absence until the situation was resolved. This situation, as you call it, is me being a responsible father, Robert told the room full of suits. My personal life has never interfered with my business decisions, and it won't start now. But privately, Robert was exhausted by the constant need to defend his choices. Every day brought new challenges and criticisms that he hadn't anticipated. Maria was struggling even more. She had moved from the garage apartment into the main house, into a beautiful suite that Robert had redesigned to be her private space. But she felt lost in the large rooms and uncomfortable with the expensive furniture. Worse than the physical adjustments were the social ones. When she took Tommy to his daycare, other parents stared and whispered. Some mothers who had always been polite before now ignored her completely. One father actually pulled his child away when Tommy tried to play with her. They think I'm some kind of criminal, Maria told Robert one evening after a particularly difficult day. Mrs. Peterson at the daycare asked me if I was really Tommy's guardian now, like she couldn't believe it was true. Robert sat beside her on the couch, where they had started having their evening talks about Tommy's day and their plans for the future. These conversations had become the anchor of their new routine. People fear what they don't understand, Robert said. Give them time to see that nothing terrible has happened. Tommy is still the same happy child he's always been. But what if they never accept it? Maria asked. What if Tommy starts getting treated badly because of who his parents are? This was Robert's deepest fear, too, but he couldn't let Maria see his doubts. Then we'll find him a new school, new activities, new friends. We'll surround him with people who judge families by how much love they contain, not by how conventional they look. Despite the outside pressure, something beautiful was happening inside their home. Tommy was thriving in ways that surprised everyone. Now that Maria could openly show her maternal affection, Tommy seemed more secure and confident. He called both Robert and Maria by parental names without confusion or conflict. During their first official family meeting, they had explained to Tommy that Maria was his other parent, and that some families were different from others. Tommy had accepted this information with the easy adaptability of a 3-year-old. So I have two parents who live with me instead of one parent who lives far away like my friend Jake? Tommy had asked, referring to his classmate whose father lived in another state. That's right, Robert had confirmed. You have me and Maria, and we both love you very much. Tommy had nodded seriously and then asked if they could have ice cream to celebrate his extra parent, which had made them all laugh. The three of them developed new traditions together. Sunday mornings became pancake time, where Tommy helped Maria cook while Robert read the newspaper aloud, sharing funny stories and explaining big words. Evenings included family walks around the neighborhood, where Tommy would run ahead and then circle back to hold both their hands, Robert taught Tommy how to throw a baseball in the backyard, while Maria cheered from the garden where she was teaching Tommy to identify different vegetables. Maria sang Spanish lullabies while Robert read English bedtime stories. They took turns with bath time, homework help, and the inevitable negotiations about bedtime routines. Most importantly, they made all major decisions about Tommy together. When it came time to choose his school for the next year, they visited campuses as a team and discussed the pros and cons together. When Tommy needed his first dental checkup, they both went to the appointment and made sure he felt supported. The legal process was moving forward smoothly, despite the public attention. Maria's citizenship application was progressing faster than expected, thanks to Robert's excellent legal team and Maria's spotless record. The paperwork to bring Rosa to the United States was more complicated. But Robert had hired specialists who were optimistic about their chances. 3 months into their new arrangement, they received unexpected news. Detective Morrison called to report that Victoria was planning to return to Los Angeles. She had apparently heard about the custody arrangement and was consulting with lawyers about her own rights. Robert felt his stomach drop. Just when their new family was finding its rhythm, Victoria threatened to disrupt everything they had built. "What does she want?" Robert asked the detective. "From what I can tell, she's claiming she wants to be part of Tommy's life again," Detective Morrison replied. "But my sources suggest she's more interested in the financial benefits of regaining custody rights. Her new husband's business is failing, and she needs money." Robert looked across the kitchen where Maria was helping Tommy with a puzzle, both of them laughing at something silly he had said. This was their real family, built on daily care, shared responsibility, and genuine love. Victoria could try to tear them apart, but Robert was ready to fight for what they had created together. Their unconventional family was worth protecting, no matter what the cost. Robert Williams had always believed that success meant working harder than everyone else. At 45 years old, he owned 3 tech companies, had offices in 12 countries, and could buy anything money could touch. His days started at 5 in the morning and ended well past midnight. Most people called him a genius businessman. Others whispered he was just lucky. But Robert knew the truth. He had sacrificed everything for his empire. The private jet touched down at Los Angeles International Airport 3 hours earlier than scheduled. The Singapore deal had wrapped up faster than expected thanks to his team's preparation. Robert should have been celebrating. Instead, he felt the familiar emptiness that came with every victory. Another contract signed, another million added to his account, another day spent away from the life he was supposedly building. As his driver navigated through the quiet streets of Beverly Hills at 2 in the morning, Robert noticed how peaceful everything looked. Street lamps cast long shadows across manicured lawns. Behind every mansion gate lived families he assumed were happy. He wondered if any of those fathers had missed as many bedtime stories as he had. The Williams estate sat on 4 acres of perfectly maintained grounds. Security cameras tracked his arrival as the car pulled through the iron gates. Robert had always entered through the main entrance, where his personal assistant would greet him with messages and his schedule for the next day. Tonight, something made him choose differently. He asked the driver to drop him at the service entrance instead. Maybe it was the jet lag, or maybe he wanted a few more minutes before returning to the demands of his complicated life. The service door was always unlocked for the staff who worked odd hours maintaining his lifestyle. Robert stepped into the kitchen where everything was spotless as always. Maria Rodriguez had been his housekeeper for 8 years, ever since his brief marriage to Victoria had ended. She kept the house running smoothly while he traveled the world making deals. Maria was quiet, hardworking, and never asked for anything beyond her salary and respect. He was about to head upstairs when he heard soft footsteps from the direction of the bedrooms. Robert paused, listening. It was nearly 2:30 in the morning. The house should have been completely quiet. Following the sound, Robert moved carefully down the hallway toward his son's room. Tommy was 3 years old now, though Robert realized with a sharp pain that he could barely remember the boy's last birthday party. He had been in Tokyo that week, closing a deal worth $50 million. The door to Tommy's room was slightly open. Robert approached quietly and peered inside. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. Maria was there, moving around the bed with the gentle care of someone who had done this routine countless times. She was adjusting Tommy's blanket, checking that his favorite stuffed elephant was within reach and making sure the nightlight was positioned just right. But it was not just her presence that shocked Robert. It was the way she moved, the familiarity of her actions, and the obvious love in every gesture. Robert watched as Maria leaned down to brush a strand of hair from Tommy's forehead. The boy stirred slightly but didn't wake up. In that moment, with the soft light from the hallway falling across both their faces, Robert saw something that made his world stop spinning. Tommy looked exactly like Maria. The realization hit him like a physical blow. How had he never noticed? Tommy had Maria's warm brown eyes, not the blue eyes that ran in the Williams family. The shape of his face, the curve of his smile, even the way he slept with his hands tucked under his chin. It was all Maria. Robert's mind raced backward through time. Tommy's birth 3 years ago, when Victoria had insisted on a private delivery with only her chosen medical team present. The way Victoria had seemed almost relieved when Robert was traveling during the first months of Tommy's life. How she had hired Maria not just as a housekeeper, but specifically to care for the baby. Maria finished tucking Tommy in and turned toward the door. She froze when she saw Robert standing in the hallway. For a moment, they stared at each other in complete silence. Robert saw fear flash across her face, followed by something that looked like resignation. Neither of them spoke. Maria walked past him toward the kitchen, and Robert followed. His heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. Everything he thought he knew about his life was crumbling around him. In the kitchen, Maria busied herself with cleaning tasks that were already complete. She wiped down counters that were spotless and organized supplies that were perfectly arranged. Robert sat down at the breakfast bar and watched her nervous movements. Finally, he found his voice. "How long?" he asked quietly. Maria's hands stopped moving. She turned to face him, her eyes filled with tears she was trying not to shed. "Mr. Williams, I can explain. How long have you known?" Robert repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Maria's shoulders sagged. She had carried this secret for so long that the weight of it had become part of her daily life. "Since he was born," she admitted. The words hung in the air between them. Robert felt like he was falling through space with nothing to grab onto. Tommy, the little boy he had been trying so hard to connect with, the child he read bedtime stories to over video calls from hotel rooms around the world, was not his son. "Victoria knows?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Maria nodded. "She made me promise never to tell you. She said if I ever spoke about it, she would make sure I was deported. My daughter Rosa lives with my mother in Mexico. Victoria said I would never see Rosa again if I betrayed her secret." Robert understood now why Maria had always been so devoted to Tommy. She wasn't just caring for her employer's child. She was caring for her own son. Every diaper changed. Every night she had stayed late when Tommy was sick. Every gentle word and patient moment had been a mother loving her child while pretending to be just the help. The cruelty of the situation overwhelmed him. Victoria had forced Maria to watch another woman take credit for raising her own son. She had made Maria live as a servant in her own child's life, threatening her family if she dared claim her rightful place. Robert thought about all the times he had come home to find Tommy laughing with Maria in the kitchen. How the boy always seemed happier and more relaxed when she was around. How Tommy had started speaking both English and Spanish, picking up words from Maria during their long days together. "Does Tommy know?" Robert asked. "He's too young to understand," Maria said, wiping her eyes with her apron. "To him, I'm just Maria who makes his lunch and reads him stories. But sometimes—" She paused, struggling with her emotions. "Sometimes he calls me Mama when he's sleepy. I always correct him, tell him I'm just Maria. It breaks my heart every time." Robert felt anger building in his chest. But it wasn't directed at Maria. She had been trapped in an impossible situation, forced to choose between claiming her son and protecting her family. Victoria had created this cruel arrangement and then disappeared from Tommy's life as soon as the divorce was finalized. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence. Outside, the automatic sprinkler system activated, watering the gardens that Robert paid a fortune to maintain but rarely noticed. His perfect life, his controlled environment, his carefully planned future, all of it was built on a lie. Tommy was Maria's son, not his. But looking at this woman who had cared for his household and his assumed child with such dedication, Robert realized something that surprised him. He wasn't angry at Maria. He was grateful to her. While he had been building his business empire, she had been giving Tommy the love and attention every child deserved. The question now was what to do with this life-changing truth.